What's going on, folks? Dr. Mike Axler here, professor of exercise science, PhD in applied human physiology, 60 plus time marathoner and ultramarathoner, and performance coach. Today, we are going to be discussing something that is relatively hot in the streets, and it is funny how this carryover goes from the endurance community to more of like the fitness, fat loss, dietary community. And it's this idea of, can you fully become fat adapted and only burn off fat as a fuel source, or are you going to be burning off mainly carbohydrates? So let's talk about, can you burn more fat instead of carbohydrates during a marathon, like the hardest endurance event you can do? So the claim is that you can just burn fat as opposed to carbohydrates. And people just think you can do that like turning a light switch on and turning it off. It's like an objective thing. Like they can control it like that. It's bananas, right? Or they don't want bananas because bananas are carbs, right? So the claim is pretty popular in both the endurance community and the low carb community. And it's really promoted in like the keto camps, the fasted cardio folks, and the fat adapted circles. And you've probably heard all about this. Maybe you've tried this in the past. Maybe you've heard it from a friend. And the claim does sound appealing, right? This idea of like, I'm going to walk or run or lift and only burn off body fat because that's what I want to get rid of. But the question is, and what we're going to try and discuss today and debunk is this a physiologically valid claim? And in order to understand that, we need to first discuss the energy systems. So how your body fuels specifically for endurance events. And our primary fuel sources during endurance events, number one, and it's going to be in this order, is going to be carbohydrates. And that's going to be like, if you're looking at a flow chart, it's going to be what we just ate, so the food we just had for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, followed by glycogen, which is the storage form of carbohydrates in both our skeletal muscle and within our liver. So carbs are the first to go. What did you just eat and what are you holding on to? And then next will be our storage form of fats, which are going to be triglycerides. However, it's important to note that the exercise intensity is going to determine which fuel source dominates. So at lower intensities, when you're just sleeping or sitting or walking, you are primarily burning body fat. However, during highly intense activities, anything over a zone 2, so lifting weights, running, biking, anything higher than around 65% of your VO2 max, you are burning carbohydrates. So there is this idea of this crossover effect. It's called the respiratory exchange ratio. So what's the research or the science have to say about this? This crossover point, as I said, when you are just sitting around or walking, you're burning primarily fat. And then when you go towards running and sprinting, you're burning carbs. So there's this crossover point where as the intensity increases, your fat oxidation drops, so therefore your ability to burn fat drops, and your carb oxidation increases, right? So when you start running more, you get hot, right? You already intuitively know that. Same thing too, when you run at higher intensities or bike at higher intensities, when you're doing something more intense, your body can't keep up with the demand by burning off fats, so you start burning off carbs. And the thing is, since typical marathon pace is around 70 to 85% of VO2 max, around that lactate threshold pace that we talked about in the last video, this is where carbs is going to dominate. As we had said, you start burning carbohydrates mainly around 60 to 65% of VO2 max, and since most people do marathon pace, and especially half marathon pace at 70 to 85% of VO2 max, you are only going to be burning carbohydrates during that marathon. And even elite fat-adapted athletes have to rely primarily on carbohydrates. However, now comes the question of, can you train to burn more fat? So is there this fat adaptation and metabolic flexibility? And the answer is yes, but there is a caveat. So with the yes, We know that with endurance training, running, biking, swimming, rowing, all the rest of it, you do increase mitochondrial capacity, mitochondrial efficiency, mitochondrial biogenesis, and therefore fat use. We've discussed that in the past. Shout out to Bill Nye. It's probably the third time in this YouTube channel I've talked about Bill Nye. But when you do more physical activity, you build up more of these engines, more of these powerhouses. That's just awesome. So it's like when you become more fit, you just build up more mitochondria and more efficient mitochondria. Mitochondria go through metabolic flexibility where they can burn off both carbohydrates and fat. So yes, you can become more fat adapted, not all the way fat adapted, but more fat adapted. It's a relative term. Secondly, can you train to burn more fat? Again, yes, such as people on low carbohydrate diets. If you are in fact in ketosis and you're not giving yourself glucose, your body will go through a process known as gluconeogenesis, which is making glucose from non-glucose precursors. But again, gluconeogenesis is your body saying, hey, you aren't giving us glucose, but we're going to make it instead. But the thing is that gluconeogenesis is there as a homeostatic mechanism to keep us alive. It's not advantageous and doesn't really work all that well at high intensities. So yes, you can throw out carbs for the rest of your life, but is it advantageous? No. And here's the caveat one. After we discussed, yes, you can sort of become more fat adapted. Fats aren't going to replace carbohydrates at race pace. As we had said, if you're over 65%, your body needs carbohydrates. So you can go through that metabolic flexibility, but you're not going to have a phenomenal race performance if you're not giving yourself carbohydrates. And that has been thoroughly studied in all ages and exercise science labs and different populations in sports, showing that the group that has the more carbohydrates is going to outperform every single solitary time the group who did not have high amounts of carbohydrates. So what happens without eating enough carbohydrates? What are the risks, so to speak, of underfueling with carbs? Number one is going to be early fatigue and hitting the wall. If anyone's ever run a marathon or heard of people who've run marathons, they know that around mile 16, 18, 20, somewhere around there, people typically hit the wall. And hitting the wall means you're running out of glycogen. As we had said, glycogen, the storage form of carbohydrates, the polysaccharides in the liver and skeletal muscles, when you start tapping that down until it becomes empty, you're going to hit the wall. You're going to start to cramp up. Your muscles don't want to contract, and you get really brain foggy. The risk of what happens when you don't have enough carbs. Number two, the second risk is reduced power output and pacing capacity. If you're going into the gym or you're going into a race and you're not fueled up, you're just not going to be as strong and you're not going to have the endurance capacity. Case closed. Number three, impaired recovery after your training session or after your race. I always tell this to my clients, I tell it to my students and all the athletes I've coached, is that if you're coming out of a really solid workout and you feel pretty good and you say, hey, I can come back again tomorrow, that's good. But if you're so dehydrated and glycogen depleted and low on energy that you're like, I'm going to have to cancel plans tonight with my friends because I'm too tired, that's going to be a huge amount of impaired recovery for tomorrow. We don't want that. That's why you need to fuel up for exercise and then recover after it. We don't want you at that like empty level where people are like, oh, go into the gym and leave nothing else on the floor. I'm like, yeah, that's great if you're going to work out once for the rest of your life. But since you want to come back tomorrow and again and again and again the next day, that's a really bad approach. And lastly, the last consequence, number four, of what happens when we underfuel with carbohydrates, and this is going to be the potential for GI distress when introducing carbs later on. If anyone's truly ever cut out carbs from their diets, taken out glucose, starches, things like that, you know that when you start introducing carbs again, it's immediately going to hold on to water weight. You're going to get bloated and uncomfortable, and that's just not all that great, especially when you're training for a race. So what do elite marathoners actually do? Like Eliud Kipchoge and all the folks on TV who are running like 4.5 minute miles. How do the best athletes fuel in the real world? And nearly all elite marathoners rely on carbs. And around 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour while exercising. That's a lot. But they fuel their gut for that. Like they're exercising enough where their body needs it. It needs it. And they're training their gut to just take it in and utilize it as a fuel source throughout. So 60 to 90 grams per hour is a lot, and they need that. And what's interesting about these elite marathoners and the triathletes is that for general population, it's recommended that we have anywhere from 45 to 65% of our diet coming mainly from starchy carbohydrates, fruits, veggies, whole grains, all that good stuff. But a lot of these elite marathoners who run like 150 miles a week or 180 miles a week, like really crazy stuff, basically a marathon a day, their diets can be upwards of 80 to 90% carbs. But a lot of these folks, they live in like other countries where they're primarily eating whole grains, fruits, and veggies, and very, 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 very little, if any, refined processed junk that you get at the store. Like any bread that you get at the store, there's going to be way more preservatives and way more sugar in it than it needs to be. These folks are relying on like fruits and veggies and even grains that they grow. So good on them for using it and building their own sustainable food sources. Further, elite marathoners also carb load before a race. This is standard practice. In like the several days leading up to a race or even like 2 weeks out, what you want to do is taper down your volume of your training to go down, and increase your carbohydrates up. So you're increasing this margin where you're not as tired as you're getting closer and closer to a race day. But then also you're fueling up so that you feel the best on race day. So we cannot discount carb loading. Further, elite marathoners also take in a variety of gels, drinks, chews, just to maintain blood glucose during the race. If they're going to crush a marathon in like 2 hours and change, they can get that done pretty quickly, but they're still going to need to take up around 2,500 to 3,500 calories. I think the average person burns around 3,000 calories during a marathon, which is nuts. And you can only store around 2,000 calories as glycogen. So they're going to need to make that up somehow. So in order to just not bonk, to not cramp up, to just stay cognitively sharp, a lot of elite marathoners take in the gels, the drinks, and the chews. And this is a little bit further on, but even ultra endurance events and all those athletes still have a ton of carbohydrates. So the final verdict, can you burn fat instead of carbs? And the answer is yes, but not at race pace. If you're just a general exerciser who goes to the gym once or twice a week, or you try to get in 8 to 10,000 steps per day, go ahead and go low carb. It's not the best for you by any means, backed by science. Like your body needs glucose, you need fruits, you need veggies. But if you're trying to be an elite marathoner, you're not going to beat the other elite marathoners if you go low carb. It's just physiologically impossible. Fat is always going to be used as a fuel source. As we said, we have the metabolic flexibility where we burn off both carbs and fats, but not at higher intensities. And if you just want to be the best marathoner you can be, you're going to need carbohydrates. TLDR, science is better than hype, right? So carbs are going to be your best friend not only during training sessions, but on race day as well. Next, you can enhance your fat metabolism or your fat oxidation, but you can never fully, completely replace carbohydrates and all the glucose that you get from them. Avoid the hype. Trust physiology, trust science, and don't trust whatever social media influencer who has really no business discussing science and human physiology. And lastly, prioritize both endurance training and smart fueling in order to have the best race possible. If you did your homework in your training leading up to the race, then you should have a good race. Awesome. And with that, I do want to thank you for tuning into another episode. I hope you learned a thing or two or three. If you did, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this with a friend, as well as scrolling on down and subscribing to my Substack and my Instagram, where I drop a whole bunch of stuff with regard for exercise science, nutrition, human physiology several times a day. And with that, I'll catch you all in the next episode.